Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time when you must withdraw from the chaos, when the noise of the world becomes so deafening that you can no longer hear yourself think. And that's the moment you must seek the secret place. That's the moment you must meet God. The necessity of solitude is not simply about being alone. It is about creating a deliberate space where you can hear the voice of truth, unfiltered by the noise of the world. We live in an age of relentless distraction. Our attention is fragmented, our minds are pulled in 1,000 directions, and our ability to sit quietly, to think deeply, to reflect on who we are and who we could be is under constant assault. Solitude is not a luxury. It is a fundamental necessity for anyone who seeks to live a meaningful life. Without it, you remain lost, perpetually reacting to the demands of others, never fully understanding what your own soul requires. When you enter solitude, truly enter it, something unsettling happens. You begin to hear the thoughts that the busyness of life has drowned out. You start to notice the unresolved conflicts, the fears you've ignored, the dreams you've neglected, and for many this is terrifying. It is easier to stay occupied, to keep moving, to fill every empty moment with noise. But this avoidance is not harmless. It is a slow corrosion of the soul. The person who never sits in solitude never really knows themselves. And the person who does not know themselves is vulnerable to manipulation, deception, and despair. Solitude forces you into an encounter with the deepest parts of your being. It strips away the personas you present to the world, the roles you play, the mask you wear. In that quiet space, you are confronted with an unembellished version of yourself, the one that exists beneath the surface. This is where you must be brutally honest. What do you truly believe? What do you truly want? What fears have been shaping your decision? What weaknesses have you refused to address? This is a moment of reckoning, a necessary one. Because if you do not face these questions in solitude, they will manifest in your life in ways you cannot control. People avoid solitude because it requires comfort. It demands that you step away from the crowd, that you reject the comfort of mindless entertainment, that you take responsibility for your thoughts. And responsibility is a heavy burden, but those who dare to embrace grace both. When the distractions fade, when the voices of the world are silenced, you begin to hear something else. The whisper of wisdom, the call to something higher, the realization that there is more to you than you have yet become. This is why throughout history, the greatest thinkers, leaders, and spiritual figures all valued solitude. It was not isolation for its own sake. It was preparation. It was in the wilderness that Moses met God. It was in the desert that Jesus found the strength to fulfill his. It was in quiet study that philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Socrates came to understand truth. These men knew that solitude was not about escaping reality. It was about equipping themselves to face it with greater strength and purpose. Solitude is where you meet yourself, but more importantly, it is where you meet something beyond yourself. Call it wisdom, call it truth, call it God. There's a presence that speaks in the silence, but you must be willing to listen. This is not about empty meditation. It is not about the self-indulgence of finding yourself in some vague direction. No, this is about actively engaging with reality at its deepest level, about wrestling with the hardest questions of existence, about aligning yourself with the highest possible good. To cultivate solitude in your life requires discipline. It is not enough to say, I'll spend time thinking when I have a free moment. You must structure it into your life with the same commitment that you give to anything else of value. This might mean setting aside time each morning to sit in silence before the demands of the day overwhelm you. It might mean retreating into nature, walking without music, without a podcast, without the need to consume something external. It might mean journaling, putting your thoughts into words so that they do not remain a chaotic swirl in your mind. However you do it, the key is to be intentional. And what happens when you commit to this practice? You become more grounded. You develop an inner stability that is rare in today's world. You stop reacting impulsively to every crisis. You have already thought deeply about who you are. You gain a kind of independence, not in the superficial sense of being self-sufficient, but in the deeper sense of knowing that your sense of worth and direction does not come from external validation. You begin to see patterns in your own thinking, to recognize where you have been lying to yourself, to understand what truly matters. More importantly, you develop the ability to hear the voice of wisdom. This is not something mystical. It is simply the natural consequence of creating space for deep thought. When you slow down, when you allow yourself to reflect, you start to perceive things that were previously hidden. You make connections you had missed. You realize solutions to problems that had seemed unsolvable. You gain insight, not just into yourself, but into life itself. And this is invaluable, because in a world that constantly demands action, the person who has taken time to think is always the one best prepared to act. There is a cost to solitude. It requires you to step away from the immediate gratification of constant engagement. It forces you to face your own weaknesses. It challenges you to take responsibility for your inner world. But the rewards far outweigh the cost. You become wiser. You become someone who is not easily swayed by fleeting emotions or the pressures of the moment. And this is what makes solitude essential, not just for personal growth, but for living a life of real significance. Because only when you have wrestled with the deepest parts of yourself, only when you have met God in that silent place, can you return to the world as someone who is capable of making a real difference. Facing the chaos within is not something people willingly do because it is deeply uncomfortable. It is far easier to ignore, to distract oneself with entertainment, work, relationships, or mindless scrolling than to sit in silence and truly confront the disorder lurking in one's own mind. But the truth is, the chaos does not go away simply because you refuse to acknowledge it. It festers. It builds, and at the worst possible moment, it emerges in the form of anxiety, anger, resentment, self-doubt, or even despair. And if you have not developed the capacity to confront it, it can consume. This is why solitude is so critical. It's where you finally face that chaos, and in doing so, begin to integrate it. The human mind is not a clean, orderly space. It is a battlefield of competing desires, unresolved wounds, irrational fears, and conflicting beliefs. Some of this disorder comes from the past, from traumas and failures you have not fully processed. Some of it comes from the present, from the overwhelming number of choices, expectations, and responsibilities pressing down on you. And some of it is deeper, more existential, the realization of your own mortality, the fear that your life lacks meaning, the recognition that the world is filled with suffering and injustice. It is tempting to avoid thinking about these things. Many people construct their entire lives around this avoidance, filling every moment with noise, refusing to be alone with their own thoughts. But avoidance is not resolution. What you do not face does not disappear. It controls you from the shadows. The person who refuses to acknowledge their anger eventually erupts in rage at the wrong time. The person who suppresses their fears ends up paralyzed when decisive action is needed. The person who never questions their own beliefs risks becoming a rigid, unthinking ideologue. To face the chaos within means voluntarily stepping into that internal battlefield and taking stock of what is truly there. What are you afraid of? What past mistakes still haunt you? What weaknesses have you been too ashamed to admit? What lies have you told yourself about who you are? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Because only when you acknowledge them can you begin to sort through them. And sorting through them is precisely what must be done. You do not eliminate chaos by pretending it does not exist. You eliminate it by confronting it and imposing order. This is why people who take time to reflect, to journal, to pray, or to meditate develop a sense of inner stability. They are not at the mercy of unseen forces within them. They have mapped the terrain of their own mind and have begun to establish structure. They recognize their patterns of thought, their recurring fears, their habitual weaknesses, and by naming them, they reduce their power. But this is not a one-time process. You do not face the chaos within once and then declare yourself victorious. No, this is a lifelong endeavor, because life itself is always shifting, always throwing new challenges, new complexities, new sources of disorder at you. The person who regularly engages in self-examination, who takes time to sit in the quiet and honestly assess their own soul, is the person who remains resilient in the face of these. They are not caught off guard when their weaknesses reveal themselves. They already know what those weaknesses are. They are not overwhelmed when uncertainty strikes. They have learned to navigate the unknown. This is why true strength is not found in those who never show vulnerability, but in those who have willingly confronted their own. The strongest people are not those who have never been broken. They are those who have looked directly at their own brokenness and chosen to rebuild themselves. And this is the essence of facing the chaos within. Not to be defeated by it, not to be consumed by it. To do this, one must first cultivate brutal honesty. You must be willing to see yourself as you actually are, not as you wish you were. This requires stripping away illusion. It is painful to admit that you have been making excuses, that you have been avoiding responsibility, that you have allowed fear to dictate your choices. But honesty is the first step toward transformation. Once you have seen yourself clearly, you can begin to change. And change is what this entire process is about. Because the person who refuses to face their chaos does not remain the same. They deteriorate. Unaddressed fear turns into cowardice. Unacknowledged failure turns into shame and resentment. But the person who confronts their inner disorder with courage begins to forge themselves into something greater. They take their weaknesses and turn them into strengths. They take their pain and turn it into wisdom. They take their fear and turn it into determination. This is not an easy road, but it is the only road that leads to true freedom. Because the person who has faced their inner chaos cannot be easily manipulated, cannot be thrown into confusion by external turmoil. They have already fought the hardest battle within. And in doing so, they have built an inner fortress, a foundation of strength that no external circumstance can easily shake. But this is not just about personal strength. It is about something even greater. When you face the chaos within, when you integrate it, you do not just change yourself. You change the way you interact with the world. The person who has mastered their own demons does not project them onto others. They do not lash out in anger because they have already dealt with their own rage. They do not spread fear because they have already conquered their own. They do not manipulate, deceive, or control others because they have already established order within themselves. This is why facing the chaos within is not just an individual responsibility. It is a moral one. Because the world is full of people who have not done this work. And they bring their unresolved chaos into everything they do. They create dysfunctional relationships, corrupt institutions, and broken societies because they have never confronted their own disorder. If you want to contribute to a better world, you must start by ordering yourself. And the only way to do that is to enter the silence, to sit with your own thoughts, to allow the chaos to rise to the surface so that you can finally deal with it. This is terrifying at first. It feels overwhelming, but the moment you choose to face it, you have already begun to win. Because now you are no longer running, you are standing firm. You are looking directly at your own fears, your own struggles and saying, I will not be ruled by these. I will confront them, I will integrate them, and I will emerge stronger. This is the path of transformation. It is not the easy path. But it is the only path that leads to true strength, true clarity, and true freedom. And when you have walked it, when you have faced your chaos and imposed order upon it, you will be a force that nothing in this world can easily shake. Order and discipline lead to clarity, because without structure, everything collapses into chaos. Life is complex, filled with unpredictable challenges, shifting circumstances, and an overwhelming number of choices. Without a system in place to organize these complexities, the mind becomes foggy, burdened, and unable to see a clear path forward. People who lack discipline drift aimlessly, pulled in different directions by their emotions, impulses, and external pressures. never truly knowing where they are going or why. But those who impose order upon themselves begin to gain control over their lives, and with control. Discipline is not about restricting yourself unnecessarily or adhering to rigid, meaningless routines. It is about creating a framework within which you can thrive. When you impose structure upon your day, when you wake up at the same time, when you set goals, when you take responsibility for your habits, you eliminate unnecessary confusion. You remove the stress that comes from indecision. Instead of wasting time figuring out what you should be doing, you already know. Instead of scrambling to fix problems that could have been prevented, you have already accounted for them. And this brings peace, a sense of stability that allows you to think more clearly and act with greater purpose. People often underestimate the power of simple, disciplined actions. Waking up at a consistent time, making your bed, exercising regularly, keeping your workspace clean. These might seem trivial, but they are not. They are acts of order, and each one strengthens your ability to bring structure to other areas of your life. If you cannot control the smallest aspects of your day, how can you expect to manage the larger, more complicated challenges that life throws at you? The truth is, the person who cannot impose order upon their own schedule, their own body, their own mind, is at the mercy of forces they do not understand. They react instead of act. They are controlled instead of being in control. And the result is a deep sense of confusion, frustration, and helplessness. Discipline does not mean that life becomes predictable or easy. Chaos will always exist. It is part of the world, part of human nature. But discipline allows you to create stability within that chaos. It gives you a solid foundation, a place from which to operate even when everything around you is uncertain. The person who has cultivated discipline can remain steady in the midst of storms. They are not easily shaken because they have trained themselves to maintain structure no matter what happens. Clarity emerges when you take control of the things you can control. When your life is disorganized, when your time is wasted on meaningless distractions, when you lack routines and direction, everything becomes foggy. You are constantly stressed, constantly overwhelmed, because nothing is in its proper place. You have no clear vision because your mind is cluttered. But when you start bringing order to your day, when you set boundaries for yourself, when you establish habits that lead to progress, the mental fog begins to lift. You start to see where you are and where you need to go. You begin to understand what truly matters. You develop the ability to focus on what is important instead of being pulled in 100 different directions by impulse and external pressures. One of the most powerful effects of discipline is that it forces you to take responsibility for your own life. Many people blame external circumstances for their lack of progress. They say they are too busy, too tired, too unlucky. But discipline eliminates excuses. It forces you to acknowledge that you have control over more than you think. You may not be able to control everything, but you can control your habit. You can control how you spend your time. You can control whether you act in a way that moves you forward or keeps you stuck. And when you take responsibility for these things, clarity, you stop feeling like a victim. You stop waiting for circumstances to change. Instead, you focus on what you can do right now to bring more order, more progress, more meaning into your life. It is not an easy process. Discipline requires sacrifice. It requires doing things that are difficult, even when you do not feel like it. But the alternative is far worse. A life without discipline is a life of regret. A life in which you constantly feel lost, directionless, and overwhelmed. The person who refuses to impose order upon themselves eventually finds that disorder takes over their life. Their relationships suffer. Their health deteriorates. Their goals remain unfulfilled. And worst of all, they lose confidence in themselves because deep down, they know they are not living up to their potential. Discipline is the path to freedom. People often believe that discipline is restrictive, that it limits them, but in reality, the opposite is true. The person who is disciplined has more time, more energy, and more ability to pursue what truly matters. They are not burdened by the stress of disorganization. They do not waste hours on meaningless activities because they have already decided what is worth their time. They are not weighed down by guilt or regret because they have taken responsibility for their actions. With clarity comes confidence. When you know what needs to be done and you have the discipline to do it, you stop second-guessing yourself. You move forward purpose instead of hesitation. You trust yourself because you have proven through your daily actions that you are capable of following through. This is how strong individuals are built, not through luck or talent, but through consistent, disciplined action that leads to greater understanding and control over their own lives. If you want clarity, start by bringing order to your daily routine. Eliminate unnecessary distractions. Set a schedule and stick to it. Hold yourself accountable for your actions. Keep your environment clean. Prioritize tasks that align with your long-term goals instead of indulging in temporary comfort. The more order you impose on your life, the clearer your mind will be. And with that clarity comes the ability to make better decisions, to stay focused on what truly matters, and to move forward with confidence. Even in the face of uncertainty, there is no substitute for discipline. There is no shortcut to... It must be earned through consistent effort, through small daily actions that build upon one another. But those who commit to this process will find themselves transformed. They will no longer be victims of their own disorganization. They will no longer be in a state of constant confusion. Instead, they will be individuals who stand firm, who think clearly, who act with purpose. And in a world that is filled with chaos, such individuals are rare. They are the ones who succeed. They are the ones who lead. They are the ones who, through their own discipline and clarity, become a force of order in a world that desperately needs it. Spiritual growth requires intentional pursuit. It does not happen by accident. You do not stumble into wisdom's strength or a deeper connection with the divine by simply existing. Just as physical strength is developed through disciplined training and intellectual growth comes through rigorous study, spiritual maturity is forged through deliberate action, through a conscious effort to seek truth and live according to its demands. This is not an easy process. It is not something that can be done passively or casually. It requires struggle, sacrifice, and persistence. But it is the only path that leads to real transformation. Many people desire spiritual depth, but few are willing to do what is necessary to attain it. They want peace, but they do not want to endure the discomfort of self-examination. They want wisdom, but they do not want to engage in the discipline of study and reflection. They want faith, but they do not want to confront doubt, to wrestle with difficult questions, to test their beliefs against reality. But there is no growth without challenge. There is no depth without... The person who waits for spiritual enlightenment to come effortlessly will remain shallow, weak, and easily swayed by external forces. Pursuing spiritual growth means actively seeking truth, even when it is uncomfortable. It means questioning your assumptions, refining your beliefs, and allowing yourself to be confronted by higher realities that demand change. This is not about blindly following tradition or adopting beliefs without scrutiny. It is about engaging fully, mind, body, and soul in the pursuit of something greater than yourself. It is about being willing to let go of what is false, no matter how comforting it may be, in order to grasp what is real. Intentional pursuit requires discipline. Just as an athlete must train consistently to develop strength, a person seeking spiritual growth must cultivate habits that lead to deeper understanding and connection. Prayer, meditation, study, solitude, service. These are not occasional practices engaged in only when convenient. They must become a way of life. The person who does not make time for spiritual development will find that it never happens. The distractions of the world will always take precedence. The urgent will always override the important. Without discipline, days turn into years and nothing changes. Spiritual growth also requires humility. No one begins this journey fully equipped. There will be mistakes. There will be misunderstandings. There will be times when progress feels impossible. The person who expects perfection from themselves will quickly become discouraged. But growth is not about achieving some static state of enlightenment. It is about continually striving towards something higher, recognizing that the process itself is valuable. The strongest individuals are not those who claim to have all the answers, but those who remain teachable, who are willing to admit when they are wrong, who understand that wisdom is a lifelong pursuit. Another critical aspect of spiritual growth is the willingness to endure difficulty. Strength is built through resistance. No one develops patience without experiencing frustration. No one develops faith without faith in uncertainty. No one develops love. Every struggle, every hardship, every moment of doubt is an opportunity for growth if it is approached with the right mindset. Many people turn away from their spiritual journey when it becomes difficult, assuming that struggle is a sign of failure. But struggle is often a sign of progress. It means you are being stretched, refined, shaped into something greater. The person who avoids difficulty avoids growth. Intentional pursuit also means surrounding yourself with the right influences. Just as an unhealthy environment weakens the body, a toxic environment weakens the soul. The people you spend time with, the ideas you consume, the habits you cultivate, these things shape you often more than you realize. If you want to grow spiritually, you must be deliberate about what you allow into your life. Wisdom is contagious, but so is foolishness. Strength is contagious, but so is weakness. Seek out those who challenge you, who push you to think more deeply, who encourage you to be better. Avoid those who pull you away from your highest potential. There is also an element of responsibility that comes with spiritual growth. The more you learn, the more you are accountable for. It is not enough to gain wisdom and insight if you do not act on it. Knowledge without application is useless. Many people accumulate information but never change their lives. They read, they listen, they discuss, but they do not act. True growth is reflected in action. If you have gained insight into what is right, do you live by it? If you have recognized a flaw in yourself, do you work to correct it? If you have discovered truth, do you share? Spiritual maturity is not measured by what you know. It is measured by how you live. This journey is not linear. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when you feel stagnant, when progress seems impossible. There will be times when doubt creeps in, when motivation fades. But the key is persistence. Keep moving forward even when it feels like you are making no progress. Keep seeking even when answers seem elusive. Keep striving even when the effort feels exhausting. The people who achieve true spiritual depth are not necessarily the most intelligent or the most naturally gifted. They are the ones who refuse to give up. And finally, intentional pursuit requires a deep, unwavering commitment to something greater than yourself. A life lived only for personal gain, for comfort, temporary pleasure will always feel hollow in the end. True fulfillment comes from aligning yourself with something higher, from dedicating yourself to a purpose beyond your own immediate desires. This is what gives life meaning. This is what makes the struggle worthwhile. Spiritual growth does not happen by accident. It must be sought, fought for, and cultivated with discipline and perseverance. It requires stepping out of comfort, questioning assumptions, enduring hardship, and committing to a higher standard. But for those who are willing to embark on this journey with sincerity and determination, the rewards are immeasurable. Clarity, strength, wisdom, and a deep sense of connection to something greater than themselves. The world is full of distractions, full of paths that lead nowhere, full of excuses for why growth is too difficult. But in the end, each person must choose whether to settle for mediocrity or to rise towards something high. Those who choose the latter will find that the pursuit itself is one of the greatest and most fulfilling endeavors of all. Silence is not merely the absence of noise. It is the space where truth reveals itself. In the modern world, silence is rare. People surround themselves with constant stimulation, television, social media, endless conversations, never allowing a moment of quiet to exist. This is not accidental. Many avoid silence because in the absence of distractions, they are forced to confront themselves. They are left alone with their thoughts, their doubts, their fears, and the questions they would rather ignore. But it is in that silence, in the stillness, truth does not shout over the noise. It waits for those who are willing to seek it in quiet, for those who are disciplined enough to step away from distractions and listen. Most people do not realize how much external noise controls them. When constantly bombarded with opinions, entertainment, and demands, they lose the ability to hear their own inner voice. They become reactive instead of reflective, following what is true. They are shaped by the endless stream of information rather than by careful contemplation. And in doing so, they lose clarity. They do not know what they truly believe because they have never sat in silence long enough to question, examine, and understand. True insight comes in the quiet moments. When a person removes themselves from distractions, when they step into silence intentionally, they create the space for deeper understanding. In silence, they begin to notice things they had overlooked. They recognize patterns in their behavior. They see where they have been avoiding responsibility. They gain a clearer sense of direction. The person who avoids silence avoids self-awareness, and the person who avoids self-awareness remains lost. But silence is not just about self-reflection, it is also about connection. Those who seek a higher truth, whether they call it God, wisdom, or purpose, will not find it in the noise of everyday life. They will find it in the moments when they step away from the chaos and listen. Throughout history, those who have sought truth have retreated into solitude. Monks, prophets, philosophers, think. They understood that clarity does not come from endlessly consuming information, but from stepping back, removing distractions, and allowing truth to emerge. This does not mean that a person must abandon society or live in isolation. It means they must be intentional about creating space for silence in their daily lives. It means turning off distractions, setting aside time to think, and resisting the urge to constantly fill every moment with stimulation. Most people have never truly experienced silence because the modern world has trained them to fear it. But once they embrace it, they begin to see its power. They realize that silence is not empty, it is full. Full of insight, full of answers, full of the wisdom that was always there but could not be heard over the noise. Silence also teaches patience. In a world that moves at an overwhelming pace, people have grown accustomed to instant gratification. They expect immediate answers, immediate solutions, immediate results. But truth does not work that way. Some answers take time. Some insights must be uncovered layer by layer. The person who has trained themselves to sit in silence, to wait, to listen, develops a patience that most others lack. They are not frantic, not desperate for constant reassurance, because they have learned to trust the process of reflection. There is also a profound humility in silence. When a person speaks constantly, they reinforce their own ideas, their own perspective. But when they step into silence, they acknowledge that they do not have all the answers. They open themselves to something beyond their own understanding. They admit that wisdom is not found in endless talking, but in careful listening. The arrogant person fears silence because it reminds them of their limitations. The wise person embraces it because they know that only by creating space for truth can they truly grow. Silence is also necessary for strength. The strongest individuals are not those who react impulsively, who are constantly speaking, constantly asserting themselves. They are the ones who have trained themselves to be still, to observe, to think before they act. They do not rush into decisions without reflection. They do not let emotions dictate their responses. They move with purpose. They have taken the time to sit in silence and gain clarity before taking action. The person who cannot be still is easily manipulated. They are controlled by whatever external force is loudest. But the person who has mastered silence has also mastered themselves. Silence is not easy. It is uncomfortable at first. It feels unnatural because modern life has conditioned people to fill every moment with activity. But those who discipline themselves to seek silence, to make it a regular practice, soon realize that it is one of the most valuable things they can cultivate. It sharpens the mind, strengthens the soul, and brings clarity that it cannot be found in. There will always be those who resist silence. They will say they do not have time, that they are too busy, that there is too much to do. But this is precisely why they need it. The more chaotic life becomes, the more necessary silence. Without it, a person is simply reacting, running from one thing to the next without ever pausing to ask if they are on the right path. With, they gain perspective from the urgency of the moment and see what truly matters. Silence reveals truth, it exposes what is hidden. It forces a person to confront themselves, to acknowledge their weaknesses, to see where they need to grow. It is not always pleasant. Sometimes it reveals things a person would rather not see, but it is always necessary. The person who avoids silence remains blind to themselves, disconnected from wisdom and lost in the noise of the world. The person who embraces it gains strength, clarity, and a connection to something greater than themselves. To seek silence is to seek truth. To embrace it is to embrace growth. And to master it is to master oneself. Those who understand this do not run from stillness. They welcome. Because in the end, silence is not emptiness. It is where the deepest truths reside, waiting for those who are willing to listen. Faith is not passive. It is an active choice, a deliberate commitment to trust in something beyond oneself, even when circumstances seem uncertain. Many people misunderstand faith as a vague emotional feeling, something that comes and goes depending on how inspired they feel in the moment, But true faith is not about feelings, it is about action. It is about choosing to believe, choosing to move forward, choosing to remain steadfast even in the face of doubt, fear, and adversity. Faith requires effort, discipline, and courage. It is not for the weak-willed or the easily swayed. It is for those who are willing to stand firm, to commit themselves fully, and to live according to what they believe, even when it is difficult. At its core, faith is a decision. It is the choice to believe in something higher, to trust in a purpose greater than personal desires, to align one's life with the truth that is not always immediately visible. This choice must be made daily, sometimes even moment by moment. It is easy to have faith when everything is going well, when circumstances are lean, when there are no challenges. But real faith is tested in struggle. It is proven in the moments when nothing makes sense, when fear whispers that it is all meaningless, when doubt creeps in and tells you to abandon your convictions. It is in those moments that faith is either strengthened or lost. Faith does not ignore reality. It does not pretend that hardship does not exist or that challenges are insignificant. On the contrary, true faith confronts reality head-on. It acknowledges suffering, loss, and uncertainty, but it refuses to be defeated by them. It does not rely on external validation or immediate results. It does not demand proof before taking. Faith moves forward despite the unknown, despite the obstacles, despite the voices, both internal and external, that say it is foolish. Choosing faith means choosing responsibility. It means taking ownership of one's beliefs, one's actions, and one's purpose. It is not about waiting for circumstances to change or for a divine sign to remove all doubt. It is about stepping forward even when the path is unclear. Many people remain stagnant because they are waiting for certainty before they act. They want absolute assurance before they commit. But that is not faith. That is fear disguised as caution. Faith is the willingness to act despite uncertainty, to trust that the path will become clearer only after you take the first step. This does not mean blind trust. Faith is not reckless. It is not ignoring wisdom or refusing to think critically. It is about making a conscious choice to believe in something greater than immediate circumstances. It is about aligning oneself with truth and acting accordingly. The person who has faith is not controlled by fear because they have already decided that their convictions are worth more than their temporary. They do not live in constant hesitation, paralyzed by the possibility of failure, because they understand that moving forward in faith is the only way to grow, to learn, and to fulfill their purpose. Faith also requires perseverance. It is not a one-time decision, but a continual commitment. There will be days when belief feels effortless, when everything seems to confirm what one already knows to be true. But there will also be days when doubt is overwhelming, when setbacks make it seem as though faith has been in vain. It is in those moments that the real test comes. The person who chooses faith does not give up when things get difficult. They press on, not because they always feel strong, but because they have decided that quitting is not an option. There is a deep power in choosing faith because it shifts focus away from fear and toward possibility. Fear tells a person that they are not enough, that they will fail, that they should not even try. Faith tells a person that they are capable, that they can endure, that their efforts are not wasted. Fear leads to hesitation, avoidance, and regret. Faith leads to action, truth, and fulfillment. The person who chooses faith does not wait for the perfect conditions before they move forward. They do not wait until they feel ready. They understand that readiness is built through the very act of moving forward. This kind of faith is not always dramatic. It is not about grand gestures or public declarations. It is often quiet, steady, and unseen. It is the daily choice to keep going, to keep believing, to keep acting in alignment with one's values. It is the decision to be kind even when others are cruel, to hold on to hope even when circumstances seem bleak, to pursue purpose even when the path is difficult. The strongest people are not necessarily the ones who have never doubted. They are the ones who have faced doubt and chosen to believe anyway. Faith is also contagious. A person who lives with conviction, who embodies their beliefs through action, inspires others to do the same. Their confidence, their perseverance, their unwillingness to be defeated by adversities, things make others take note. Faith, when truly lived out, has a way of drawing others in, of challenging them to examine their own fears, their own hesitations, their own unwillingness to commit fully to something greater than themselves. Faith demands sacrifice. It requires letting go of fear, of comfort, of the illusion of control. It demands trust, not just in an external higher power, but in the process of growth itself. It requires understanding that some things will never be fully understood, that some answers will never be given in the way one expects, and that certainty is not a prerequisite for action. In the end, faith is a choice. It is not something that happens to a person. It is something they must actively decide over and over again. It is the choice to trust, to act, to believe, even when it is difficult. And it is this choice made consistently that leads to strength, resilience, and ultimately a life of purpose. Those who understand this do not wait for faith to come to them. They pursue it, they cultivate it, and they live it. And in doing so, they become the kind of people who can stand firm in the face of anything. Obedience to divine guidance brings clarity and direction, but it is not an easy path. It requires humility, discipline, and a willingness to surrender personal desires for a higher purpose. Many people struggle with the idea of obedience because they associate it with restriction, with losing their autonomy, with submitting to something that limits their freedom. But true obedience is not about limitation. It is about alignment. It is about aligning oneself with a greater truth, a higher order, a deeper wisdom that transcends personal impulse and momentary emotion. When a person commits to obedience, they are not giving up their freedom. They are directing it towards something meaningful, something that leads to growth, strength, and clarity. Many people live in a state of confusion, constantly questioning their purpose, their direction, their decision. They move from one thing to another, trying to find meaning, trying to find something that will give them a sense of stability. But they resist the very thing that would provide that clarity, submission to something greater than themselves. They want answers, but they are unwilling to listen. They want direction, but they refuse to follow. They remain stuck, not because the path is unclear, but because they are unwilling to walk it. Clarity does not come from endlessly analyzing every possibility. It comes from action, from obedience, from stepping forward in trust even when the full picture is not yet visible. Obedience is an act of trust. It is the willingness to believe that there is a higher wisdom, that there is a greater plan, that the steps laid out before a person are leading somewhere meaningful, even if they do not fully understand it in the moment. This kind of trust is not blind, it is built through experience. It is strengthened through moments of surrender, through choosing to follow even when it is difficult, through seeing how obedience leads to greater clarity and direction. Over time, the person who obeys who aligns themselves with divine truth, begins to see patterns that others do not. They begin to understand that what seemed like restrictions were actually protections, that what felt like sacrifices were actually investments in something greater. There is a discipline to obedience. It is not simply about following rules or adhering to commands without thought. It is about cultivating the inner strength to choose what is right over what is easy, to prioritize truth over personal comfort. Many people struggle with obedience because they are driven by their emotions, by their impulses, They want to do what feels good, what is convenient, what requires the least resistance. But obedience is not about convenience. It is about commitment. It is about making choices based on what is right rather than what is immediately satisfying. The person who practices obedience develops a strength that those who follow only their impulses never attain. Obedience brings stability. A person who is constantly chasing after their own desires, who is always changing direction based on what feels good in the moment, remains restless, uncertain, lacking in purpose. But a person who is committed to obedience, who has surrendered to a higher order, finds that they are not easily shaken. They have a foundation. They have direction. They have a sense of purpose that does not waver based on circumstance. This stability is not a result of ignorance or blind faith. It is a result of experience, of seeing how obedience leads to clarity, of recognizing that there is a structure to reality that rewards those who align themselves with it. This does not mean that obedience is easy. There will be times when the path is difficult, when the choices required are painful, when the cost of obedience feels overwhelming. But it is in those moments that obedience is most valuable. It is easy to follow when the way is clear, when the sacrifices are small, when the benefits are immediately visible. But true obedience is tested in hardship. It is proven in the moments when doubt is strongest, when the temptation to abandon the path is greatest. The person who remains obedient in those moments develops a strength that cannot be shaken, a resilience that carries them through any challenge. Obedience also requires humility. It demands the recognition that a person does not have all the answers, that their perspective is limited, that their understanding is incomplete. Many people resist obedience because they want to be in control. They want to decide their own path, to determine their own direction, to define their own truth. But control is an illusion. No one truly has control over everything. The person who insists on controlling every aspect of their life often finds themselves lost, anxious, and uncertain. But the person who is willing to submit, to trust, to obey finds that they are guided, that they are given clarity, that they are led towards something greater than they could have achieved on their own. There is a profound freedom in obedience. It removes the burden of constant uncertainty, the stress of having to figure everything out alone. It provides a framework, a structure, a sense of certainty in an otherwise chaotic world. This does not mean that there will never be questions, never be struggles, never be moments of doubt. But it does mean that there is a foundation to return to, a guiding truth that provides direction even in the most challenging times. The person who chooses obedience does not wander aimlessly. They move with purpose. They walk a path that leads somewhere meaningful. Obedience is also about action. It is not enough to know what is right. One must do what is right. Many people understand the principles of truth, of integrity, of righteousness, but they do not act on them. They hesitate, they make excuses, they wait for a more convenient time. But truth that is not acted upon is wasted. Knowledge without obedience is useless. The person who truly values truth does not simply acknowledge it. They live by it. They refuse to compromise, even when it is difficult. And in doing so, they gain clarity, direction, and strength. Ultimately, obedience is not about restriction. It is about transformation. It is about becoming the kind of person who is not swayed by every passing emotion, who is not lost in uncertainty, who does not live in a state of constant confusion and hesitation. It is about aligning with truth, committing to a higher purpose, and walking a path that leads to fulfillment. Those who embrace obedience do not do so because they are weak or afraid. They do so because they have seen the power of living in alignment with something greater than themselves. They understand that true freedom is not found in doing whatever one wants. It is found in doing what is right. And those who live this way find that obedience is not a burden, but a gift. It is the key to clarity, direction, and a life of deep and lasting meaning. Strength in faith does not come from wishful thinking or blind optimism. It is built through endurance, through standing firm in the face of adversity, through refusing to waver even when everything seems uncertain. Many people believe that faith is simply about having positive feelings or hoping for the best, but real faith is much deeper. It is the unshakable conviction that there is meaning, that there is purpose, that there is something higher guiding one's steps even when life is difficult. This kind of faith is not fragile. It does not crumble under pressure. It does not disappear when hardship arises. Instead, it grows stronger through trials, through resistance, through the process of facing challenges head on and overcoming them. Faith is like a muscle. It must be exercised, tested, and stretched in order to grow. A person who never faces difficulty, who never encounters struggles, who is never forced to rely on something greater than themselves, will never develop true strength and faith. It is easy to believe when everything is going well, when life is comfortable, when there are no major obstacles. But real faith is forged in struggle. It is in the moments of uncertainty, in the seasons of pain, in the times of waiting and wondering that faith is refined. Just as a person builds physical strength by lifting heavier weights, faith becomes stronger when it is challenged. The person who avoids hardship, who refuses to endure difficulty, who gives up the moment things become difficult, never experiences the true power of faith. Endurance is essential to faith. Many people start strong, full of enthusiasm and excitement, but when challenges arise, they falter. They become discouraged. They begin to doubt. They wonder if their faith was misplaced. But endurance means staying the course even when the road is rough, even when the path is unclear, even when everything inside wants to quit. The person who endures is the one who ultimately sees the reward, who ultimately experiences the depth of faith that cannot be shaken. Endurance in faith means choosing to trust even when there is no immediate evidence that things will improve. It means holding on when everything around says to let go. It means refusing to be controlled by fear, by doubt, by circumstances. Faith requires resilience. Life is unpredictable, full of challenges, setbacks, and disappointments. No one is immune to suffering. But what separates those who remain strong from those who fall apart is resilience, the ability to keep going, to keep moving forward even when everything is against them. Resilience in faith does not mean ignoring pain or pretending that everything is fine when it is not. It means facing difficulty with courage, refusing to let hardship define or destroy one's belief. It means getting up after every fall, learning from every failure, growing stronger with every challenge. The strongest people are not the ones who have never struggled, they are the ones who have struggled and refused to give up. Faith is also a choice. It is not something that simply happens to a person. It is something they must actively choose again and again. Every day presents opportunities to either trust or to doubt, to either hold on or to let go, to give in to fear. The person who chooses faith does not do so because it is easy. They do so because they understand that without faith, life becomes empty, directionless, meaningless. Faith is the foundation that keeps a person grounded, the anchor that holds them steady when everything else is uncertain. Courage is necessary for strong faith. Fear is the greatest enemy of faith. It whispers that things will never change, that failure is inevitable, that trust is foolish. But courage silences fear. Courage chooses faith even when fear is overwhelming. It takes courage to keep believing, to keep trusting, to keep moving forward when nothing makes sense. The person with strong faith is not without fear. They simply refuse to be controlled. They understand that fear is temporary, but faith enduring. They choose to walk by faith, even when the road ahead is uncertain, even when the outcome is unknown. Faith is not just about individual strength. It is also about connection. A person with strong faith does not isolate themselves. They surround themselves with others who encourage them, who challenge them, who remind them of the truth when doubt tries to take hold. Faith is strengthened in community, in shared wisdom, in the accountability of others who are also walking the same path. Isolation weakens faith. It allows doubt to grow unchecked, fear to take hold, and discouragement to settle in. But when faith is shared, when it is nurtured in the presence of others who also believe, it becomes even stronger. Discipline plays a crucial role in maintaining strong faith. It is not enough to believe occasionally, to trust only when it is convenient. Faith must be nurtured, cultivated, strengthened daily. This means engaging in practices that build faith. Reflection, study, prayer, meditation, acts of service. Just as an athlete trains consistently to maintain their strength, a person of faith must be intentional, maintaining their spiritual strength. Those who neglect their faith, who only turn to it in times of crisis, will find that it is weak when they need it most. But those who discipline themselves, who remain consistent, who actively build their faith every day, will find that it is strong enough to withstand anything. Faith is transformative. A person who has strong faith does not remain the same. They become bolder, wiser, more resilient. They begin to see life differently, not as a series of random events, but as a journey with purpose, with meaning, with direction. They do not live in constant fear of what might happen. They live with confidence, with peace, with assurance that they are guided, that they are not alone, that their faith is leading them towards something great. Ultimately, strengthened faith is not about never struggling, never doubting, never facing difficulty. It is about refusing to let those things define or defeat you. It is about standing firm when everything else is uncertain. It is about enduring, growing stronger with every challenge. Faith is not for the weak. It is for those who are willing to fight for it, to commit to it, to choose it daily. And those who do will find that faith is not just something they hold. It is something that holds them. The journey to the secret place with God is not an easy one, nor is it meant to be. It requires discipline, surrender, endurance, and an unshakable commitment to faith. It demands obedience to divine truth, a willingness to trust even in uncertainty, and the courage to stand firm when everything else is shifting. It is not a place that is stumbled upon. It is a place that is sought, a place that is fought for, a place that is cultivated through daily choices, through perseverance, through an unrelenting pursuit of the highest good. In this secret place, there is clarity, there is purpose. There is a sense of peace that transcends circumstances, a strength that does not crumble under pressure, a foundation that holds firm no matter the storm. This is not the illusion of peace that the world offers, peace that is fragile, dependent on comfort and fleeting circumstances. This is a deeper peace, a peace rooted in the knowledge that life has meaning, that suffering has purpose, that every challenge is an opportunity to grow, to strengthen, to refine one's faith. The person who finds this secret place does not live in fear. They do not waver with every difficulty, nor do they chase after distractions to numb the weight of uncertainty. They walk with purpose. They move with conviction. They understand that obedience is not a burden, but a key to freedom. That faith is not a crutch, but a weapon. That endurance is not suffering for the sake of suffering, but preparation for something greater. This place is not reserved for a select few. It is available to anyone who is willing to seek it, to commit to the journey, to endure the trials that lead there. But not everyone will find it, because not everyone is willing to pay the cost. Not everyone is willing to sacrifice comfort for wisdom, pleasure for purpose, fear for faith. The path is narrow, but for those who walk it, the reward is beyond measure. The secret place with God is not just a destination, a way of life. It is a state of being, a way of thinking, a commitment to living in alignment with truth, no matter the cost. And those who dwell there are unshaken. They are unwavering. They are strong not because they have never faced hardship, but because they have walked through it and emerged even stronger. They are at peace, not because life is easy, but because they have found something greater than comfort. They are victorious, not because they have never struggled, but because they have refused to be defeated. And that is the ultimate call, to seek, to fight, to endure, to stand firm, and to enter the secret place and never turn back.